Never Work a Day talks to folks that are pivoting their lives to follow their passions. We talk about pitfalls, misadventures, hilarious and heartbreaking, meet the outstanding individuals, and learn about their continuing journey. I'm your host, Nickey Frankel, purveyor of platforms and creator of play spaces, and I'm so excited to bring you the stories of these extraordinary individuals. Our guest today is Mica Scalin. Here's a bit of info about her. Number 1, she grew up in Richmond, Virginia. Number 2, she made documentaries about mermaids, tap dancing, and marriage equality. Number 3, curated an art show for dogs. Number 4, partner at Another Limited Rebellion, an art and innovation consultancy. Number 5, she's a creative investigator and leadership coach. Now let's get into it. Hi, Mica. It's so nice to see you.
It's really nice to see you too, Nickey.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to talk to you. So I met you, well, you were my job coach, full transparency, right? For how long were we? Were we like a couple of years during the pandemic?
Yeah, it was probably a year, yeah.
Right? Yeah, and you were very, very helpful because I was going through a lot of turmoil and transition at the time, and you were very supportive, and you made me feel like I had a little bit of a network, even just in one person. So thank you for that, which is why I'm so excited to have you on our show.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, just to do a bit of backgrounds around where you came from and what you did initially. Well, you went to school for media studies, which I didn't know actually when I first started working with you, which is interesting because why did you like media studies? Where did it come from that you were interested?
Well, my BFA was in photography,
Okay.
so fine art photography.
Yeah.
But when you study photography, you also study sort of the history of media in a way.
Right.
And that part intrigued me as much as making art.
That's interesting.
So I just got really into it and read a lot of media theory books and then had the opportunity to go to school. And that's what
you got your BFA in photography, but your MA in, right? Your
media
master's in media
and
studies.
performance.
Yeah. And how those two come together. How does performance and media studies come together?
How do they not? Especially even more so now, I think.
Tell me about it. Right? What do you mean?
This could be the whole topic.
Well, let's just do a little bit of your point of view on it because it's I don't know. It's not. Performance isn't always talked about in a way of talking about
and performance
media.
studies is pretty narrow of a topic, and also at the same time, as performance studies is narrow. This is very academic. Media studies has become more expansive. What is incorporated in media studies is many, many things.
Everything is media, right?
At this point, right?
Yeah.
But it's really also a critical theory lens, which is what I studied. Not just I was already doing it. I didn't need to learn to produce it. I was already working in media, and I had that BFA, so I knew how to make media. And it was more of a theory lens where you're actually looking at the structures and the power dynamics and how that impacts, what you see and
how you show it,
how it shows up. Yeah. And so I was interested also in the sort of, what are the power dynamics in how it's made? Be working in media, you're very aware of that.
Yes,
so, and then how does that result
correct.
in what the outcome is? And then what does that impact on people who are experiencing it and their understanding of it?
Were you looking at photography in regard to storytelling and journalism, or was it just as pure art, or all of it?
No, I studied it. Well, I mean, I loved journalistic photography. I loved all of it. But my focus was on fine art and using the photography was a way to help me understand the world. And making the pictures, and then printing the pictures. Now that shows you, dates me a little bit, but when I went to photography school.
Like a dark room?
Like a dark room.
Like a dark room. I love the way they used to smell. That was my favorite
amazing
thing.
Smell. Yeah,
I know. No one knows about that smell
probably
anymore.
about 8 years. They do now again, I would say. It's come back around, I would say.
Well, because it's retro or whatever.
Yeah, and it is so as a media studies thing, every new media kind of retrieves an old media and hunger for something old. This is a little Marshall McLuhan reference, but one of the ways of understanding media that he developed was this tetrad, and one of them is to think about what does a new media retrieve that is old? And one of those, sort of this increased digital media actually made people want tactile things. So there is a resurgence of interest in
original,
darkroom photography.
Right.
I won't go back to it.
No.
I did 8 years in that chemistry. It's not healthy, actually. It's not
good for
economically or ecologically safe.
There's nothing good about it.
But it was beautiful for learning, actually, about how the eyeball works and how perception works, and really slowing myself down.
And also process, right?
Process.
Because
Following
depending on how long you keep it in any particular trough.
It's beautiful. And it's magical. That's the other thing that's so cool about photography. Is you're just watching like, it's science and magic and art at the same time.
It's all of the things, all encompassed.
Yeah.
Oh, look at you. What was your lens?
It's full of good metaphors.
I know, great metaphors. But what was your lens when you were doing photography? What were your favorite things to look at and sort of the way that you approached it? Just curious.
I was voracious. I just loved everything about it. I love that you're a part of it when you're physically present, capturing an image. There's the moment, the decisive moment where you're capturing an image. You're somewhere physical in a place with people when you choose to press the shutter and allow the light into the dark box and make an impression. All this stuff, and then you get another opportunity when you develop that into a picture. So it's like another chance to be reflective and think about that moment that you captured. And then there's another opportunity when you're sharing it with people. So
and their reactions to it and what they see in it versus what you see in it. Obviously, yeah.
And you'll see how all this plays out into how I do my work now.
Of course. And so you you're certified in leadership coaching. But so how did you jump from, so you got your MFA in media studies. Did that feel like, what was the transition? How did you get?
Oh, Nickey.
You can give a quick.
It was not like a jump. It wasn't a ladder. I've learned to describe my professional journey as like weaving a basket.
Okay.
Because sometimes you're like, am I at the same place I was again?
Or am I going around and around?
Yeah, you are going around and you are kind of at the same place, but you're at a little bit of different version of it.
Maybe getting
you're
taller, maybe you're getting more perspective all the way around it, maybe.
Yeah, that was the best metaphor I could
That's a very good metaphor. I like it.
It really had to, because for a long time when I was like, if I'm on a ladder, clearly these rungs just keep breaking and I'm going nowhere.
Well,
so the ladder wasn't working.
Yes.
Yeah. So
weaving a basket.
It's weaving a basket.
So from your basket,
and that's good.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's a good metaphor because I think we're all sort of weaving a basket.
Right? Yeah.
Because if there's no ladder, what's the ladder? Unless we're an actual corporate structure that was created.
No, it doesn't work for anybody.
It doesn't work at all across the board. So what made you interested in leadership coaching, though? Just I guess
probably that's. Didn't know I was interested in leadership. Probably I didn't have the language for that.
Yeah, I know.
Coming from the arts, you don't really get a lot of exposure to that kind of thing.
You do not.
It was when I initially started thinking about it. Well, there is a throwback, but initially when I ended up in New York and working in actually in like corporate media, I worked in entertainment, marketing, and innovation in television networks. So I worked at Showtime and NBC. I was in the first digital studios at NBC.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at you.
Predated YouTube.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I feel like I was a fly on the wall for so many things. But I think in those experiences, recognizing that I kind of thought I was having success in those spaces, despite the fact that I only had a BFA. That was like my mindset at the time. Like, oh, I just like tumbled into this space with my like little art degree and just been figuring things out. And then I started to realize that the reason why I'm here in this space at this time, it was a media innovation moment. We talked about that, was actually precisely because I had that very intense training in the arts and creativity that had given me this kind of rigorous approach to creativity that leads to innovation with that focus.
Right.
So
it was your creativity that gave you sort of the entrance in, or at least ability to see it, right?
It's a lot of things. But I think the leadership component comes in when then you're in a corporate structure where you have managers and leaders and boss, very intense corporate structure, which I was totally unprepared for.
Right, of course.
I didn't work my way up on a ladder. I've been working for artists' businesses, essentially. And so that was a very different dynamic.
Of course.
And suddenly I'm kind of in a middle management situation in a very corporate environment, totally unprepared. Yeah. And that sort of understanding was that the leaders themselves were not prepared to manage or lead innovation.
You saw that,
right?
Yes, you saw that. You saw that very clearly, that was not...
bringing these very interesting people together to do some like potentially very exciting, interesting work. And then it is often getting just squashed by the structures. Right. Or, I mean, I would think at first, I was like, oh, these people are either like idiots or just like totally inept. What's wrong with them? And then I started realizing, as I got to know my colleagues, they're not all jerks. A lot of them are really cool, really smart. They have different skill sets. But also there was plenty of opportunity for me to learn a lot of the things I needed to be competent in the marketing space, right? And in a lot of the business, understanding business things, I was able to develop those skills, lots of opportunities for me to learn on my own, essentially. But there was no opportunities for other
people to
individuals
learn
who had learned those things in their business schools to learn the skills that I had. So I realized there was like a gap in the knowledge space I just had no understanding of. And sort of at the same time, kind of learning a little bit more about how do they learn and what are they learning in these business and management schools?
What is there any training to be able to
Right,
facilitate?
yeah.
Because they would bring in talent, or they'd bring in people that have arts background and then wouldn't necessarily know what to do with them.
And the leadership
right?
was people who didn't typically come from those environments. They
Right.
came out. So I was also like, sort of like, well, where are they coming from that they don't have this? Like, I was
They
so
don't have the
ignorant,
skill
you know?
set. Well, you go in and you're kind of, yes, I understand. If you go into a corporate structure coming from arts, which is something I'm also familiar with.
They also don't teach you about your industry when you're in the arts. So you are ignorant of your own. We talked about this. You're totally ignorant of your own industry as an
Or you know that your own industry is terrible and will treat you badly and and you'll never make any money and, you're going to end up being a teacher. So it's,
Yeah, you show up with a lot of these perceptions and assumptions that color already how you show up in that space. So,
yes. I mean, I guess I feel the same because when I was working in various jobs that were not in the arts, that I would be confronted with leaders that didn't necessarily know what to do with people that were creative or were creatively minded or had anything outside of sort of a corporate point of view. And it was tricky to work with those people because they didn't actually know what to do with me.
You're being charged with something, but then there's actually no understanding of how to lead innovation or lead create. Now we have some things have changed, but in that industry that I was in, which was just a lot of clashing.
And it was also a stressful environment, probably
stressful
too,
environment,
right? Because you're working in production and television production, and that's deadlines and stressful and all the rest of that. So there's not a lot of room for innovation or creativity.
I think that's where a lot of that comes from, though, right?
I
agree.
Comes from
those sometimes from these very intense. Doesn't have to, but
I think it does.
I think
it does by design, unless it's squashed.
But exactly, there's very very easily can be, as we know, totally squashed. And also like the one time someone, oh, hey, we want your ideas. Come put them in our idea box. And then everybody realizes everyone gets excited and shares their ideas. And then either nothing happens or there's something that detrimental that happens to people who share ideas. Any number of things.
It's a token. It's
that
really
completely squash people's, creativity in those contexts, and they learn that it's not a place to bring that, and that's And
then they start feeling a bit deadened by the work, and so I mean, did you? So you didn't stay in that for very long then?
I stayed in it for a while. Yeah, I had a career for a while. Yeah,
coming out of that, you felt okay. Well, I see that hole in the market, and maybe.
Yeah, it was. How did we get there?
How did we get there?
How do you get
there? It's okay.
Just, I thought I was really kind of living my dream. I really wanted to understand what's the inside of media industry. Like, what is there? Why is this is coming from the internet was very different. TV was very different. And I was like, why is so much garbage out there? Like, why is this a mess? Why is this content horrible? Whatever. Yeah. This was my impression at the time, kind of end of the 90s, early 2000s. And so I was like, let's go inside and see what is happening. And I serendipitously, because I had these experimental kind of digital media skills that I had gained just as an artist, my own interests, I was able to apply that and bring that into the context of those corporate spaces where they really needed people that had some understanding of that while they were just figuring out the legal aspects, honestly.
Yes,
so it was probably temporary for me anyway, because the ethics of it got really ambiguous really quickly, as you can imagine.
Still true.
Still true. Yeah. And this is interesting because if you were in that space earlier, the signs were not just there. They were like huge red flags that were there from the very beginning of all of us. We worked with Facebook very early on. We worked with Twitter very early on. I was like very early adopter to all of these spaces and into encouraging creators, whether they were corporate or my friends who are artists, into utilizing these spaces as like, hey, here's opportunity. Yeah. And then very quickly it was like, oh, this is not going anywhere good. And that's why that's really why I got out. I had some very decisive moments with some people in authority in those spaces who were like, we don't need to have ethics. We're in entertainment.
Right.
And I was like, who told you that?
Well, that's the through line for yes.
Who told you? But then I'm thinking, where did you go to school? Like, how do they teach you? So yeah, then the just desserts for me, honestly, was that then I am, like, my business partner, who is also my brother, Noah. We developed a way of bringing an arts-based learning into leadership development. It was pretty serendipitous, but also very strategic. I had this idea that like this could exist, that there should be a creativity training for people that are going into management and leadership, whether they're managing creative spaces or not. That is a component. There's
across the board, it's necessary.
Yeah, right? There's some things, the ability to adapt and to be resilient and to keep coming up with more ideas, and also to help other people to be able to do that. Yes. You don't have to come up with all the ideas,
but you need to facilitate
other people,
yes,
right? And you need to make a space, an environment where people can bring that to the table, right? And feel brave enough to do that. So, so the just desserts for me was that like, we ended up designing a program creativity for GE's Crotonville Training Center and working in a program that my boss had gone to when I was in one of these horrible environments.
Sure.
And I was like, I'm right. See?
Yes.
So,
and you did. And you were able to kind of build something.
Thousands of leaders went through our program, senior leaders at GE, to help with that transformation they were going through.
And did you see
kind
of the results of what happened? What came out of that then?
What comes out of that? I don't really, unfortunately.
Do you get to know?
In that capacity? Well, what comes out of it is, people reaching out to us 6-10 years later telling us that they still remember that session that they had with us, that we would spend like a day with these leaders.
Because people are having aha moments or kind of breakthroughs.
That this material is an experience, a physical, personal experience in a collective where they were learning together.
Yeah.
And to hear that material, that experience with us sticks with people years and years later is really amazing. Sometimes they'll write to us a week later and be like, hey, I used this with my family. Right. And that's also really meaningful, know? So sometimes it takes longer to figure out how to use some of these learnings in your work.
Yeah.
That can take time.
Okay.
But often people find ways to apply it right away in their family. And I think that's part of the learning, where can you apply it right away?
So is it design thinking? It's creative thinking, right? Is sort of the crux of it. Also,
I would say like it's actually art making.
Right. Well, wait. So the name
design
of it,
thinking.
The name of what you created is called Another Limited Rebellion. I want to know, when you went to GE, was it just kind of a practice that you had? Had you not named it yet? Had you not actually confirmed what it was that you were doing and the name of the company, as it were?
The company agency name. Okay. Another Limited Rebellion was an inherited name. This was, as I said, my brother Noah.
It's a great name.
Yeah, he had his own graphic design business, which was actually one of the first social impact businesses. It wasn't really a thing. He's very innovative, cutting edge person himself. And while I was innovating in new media, he was innovating in social impact, and he had this design company, and he decided he was going to educate his clients on socially conscious practices, which meant like, can we use recycled paper? Can we use soy ink? This was very different at that time, right? And also the kinds of clients he chose to work with. So he was leading with his ethics. And this is like before B Corp, all this kind of stuff. So he was doing that kind of work, and the company name was Another Limited Rebellion. And he had picked that name like a million years ago. I think he was using that for just something random. He just did in his head. And I think it was based on like, oh my gosh, Minor Threat.
Okay.
We're old punk rockers. So it goes back to that. So it's like a little bit of like playing around. What kind of impact can you make? How much do something,
Yeah,
better
like
than
some kind of
nothing.
rebellion, even if it's limited, even if it's
you don't know what impact you're really going to have.
It's a good name.
So when we realized we were going to transform into this really serving more complex, larger organizations in this learning and development space, it really is. That's what it is. They have very limited opportunity to get time with people. Companies don't have, unfortunately, a lot of time to spend on, or money often to spend on learning and development. I think it should be a priority, but a lot of people do. But it's often you get time you get, and then you try to really influence people really intensely, give them a rich amount of material in a short amount of time, which is how we also really try to develop. Like, these are people who, like, their time is so valuable at their companies, and they are responsible. They have 300 people that report to them, and they are global leaders of X, right? So their time is really valuable to this organization. So if I'm going to be with them for a day, I need to jam pack it and make sure I give them something they can really use, even though I'm coming in with like, hey, we're going to do art, guys. They can't.
Do you do art with them? Yeah?
That's what we do.
Okay. What kind of art do you guys do?
It really depends. So like I said, we developed it based on the needs of the client, what the outcomes they're looking for.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we do, people are coming in, it's often, for the past decade, it's been this word innovation, which, what does that mean? It feels like a buzzword. But it's just, it's new ways of doing things, new processes, new outcomes.
And would they be open to, I mean, and how did you know, I guess, so when you first started with GE, did you kind of sit down and make a plan with Noah and say, okay, we're going to do these sorts of exercises with these folks? Or like, how did you what was the brainstorm that you had that made you realize the stuff that you wanted to do with them that would...
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said, because I had that experience of working in that context and being kind of frustrated. And I'm a sort of like a systems thinker. I like to really zoom out and think about the whole structure. It goes back to my why I loved sort of critical media theory. It's about looking at the whole system. So I was like thinking about that. And then my brother this is why we work together. I think he's really, if you see his artwork, he's like very different kind of thinker, right? We're like sort of, we bring together two different creative capacities, I would say, and he was telling a story about an art project he had that went viral on the internet. So while I was making videos on the internet, he was sharing skull art. And it was at a time when things could go viral. So he had this experience with a daily art project going viral. So he would tell that story. And so he was invited to tell that story to leaders at GE. And I was like,
interesting.
You're coming here to talk to GE? And I was like, wonder why. My first question was why.
Yeah, of course. That would be my question too.
And my second, I was like, okay, well, let me go with you and like observe and find out why, right? My second question was, how much are you charging them?
Yes. A lot.
We're talking about business here. And so how much are you charging them? He told me, and I was like, okay, hard stop. Like anytime anyone asks you to do this again, if people like that are asking you, it needs to go through me because we need to add at least 1 0, if not more, which we did. Yeah, but I need to understand like what was the value, what they were getting out of it, and what was the purpose. So
what were they looking to hear from him?
Right.
I suppose, right.
So we've really over that time, that's what we did. So I went, I listened, we broke down. Okay, he was already sharing it. You had seen his talk that he had developed at GEL. Actually, that's where we initially met.
That's correct.
A conference that you produced.
Good Experience Live, which was a conference that we did.
Wonderful conference that you produced.
Yes, it was a great conference. Yeah.
Yeah, and my business partner, Mica Scalin, had shared his work several times there, and we designed workshops. So yeah, it was just taking the idea of taking an artist's practice and process and like breaking it down, sharing amazing pictures, pulling back the curtain for someone. So not just like most exposure people had to artists or art or creative people. If you're coming from a really corporate context and you've spent your whole life, those are people that really are really like truly climbing a ladder, right? And a lot of the people that we were working with at that time. Now it's definitely different, but I think it's still the same. But if you're on a certain track, let's say, you would be tracked a certain way and you're like, they're heading you, the company's helping you, supporting you grow towards a certain role.
Exactly.
And the reason why you've gotten there is because you were pretty good at doing what people wanted you to do. Like you're a good rule follower, you could get the grade you need to get, you could follow the instructions, and then you get to that role, and they call the executive break. This is just dorky stuff, but I love it.
It's good.
So you get to that point, and this is very true for all of us, though. And you get to a point in your life, right, where the way you've been doing things it's been working for a while, stops working.
You need to do something else. You need to retract.
And that's when you need, a coach. Or some leadership development.
You also might need to hear a story about somebody's process that thought about things a few different ways, and maybe that's revitalizing.
And to really, but this is like really thinking about it really differently. And these are people in the context of a larger organization, which is also what gets me very excited. Like it's not about individual creativity, which is wonderful, but this is about being creative for the purpose
part of a larger.
Yeah. How do we do this together? We want to do something together. It's about like getting people excited, motivated.
Yeah.
And capable of creating better together. Creating better together.
And being collaborative too, right? Yeah. And supporting each other in these environments.
What does that mean? Collaborative becomes a buzzword. So a lot of what we do is often taking these buzzwords, innovation, creativity, collaboration, get out of the box, like the things that people have heard over and over again.
And just breaking them out of it.
Let's just break it down. We're not going to use we have like a language that we use that's very buzzword free, very practical, and we do things. So if anything, it's an arts-based learning strategy, but I call it's a little bit like, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
I'm not trained in that. It's not that. I don't want to say that, but it kind of works like that, right? Where we're having people, it's an adult learning as well. It's like we're doing something to physically embody and demonstrate it. And using your body is such a different way of learning. Yes. A lot of the learning is, I'm going to tell you something. Like, how does learning go when you think of, I'm going to go to a leadership class? Like, what do you think would happen?
That's the whole thing is I don't know. I don't know what a leadership class would look like.
Slides.
Is there a slide? Is there a trust fall? Is there
trust fall?
Is there some,
fire.
Are you jumping over fire? Like, I guess it could go a lot of different ways depending on, I guess it depends also on what leadership means within an organization, right? Because I don't know, because leadership could not be about creativity. And in my limited experience of corporate life, it's not always about creativity. Creativity is left to the creatives, and then everyone else sort of works around them.
They say management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right thing. That's from Peter Drucker.
That's very good. Yes.
But that's also about like the idea
doing
of
the right thing means what?
Right. And that's a good point. People exploring what does that mean for you and how do you show up and what is appropriate for this organization, this group of people
Right.
at this time.
Exactly. I mean, and art, do people feel when you go in that they're scared of art? They're like, I don't know how to draw.
100%.
Like, I don't know
And
how,
like you said the thing like trust fall, and we talked about walk on fire, and that's kind of like we make fun, but that's for a reason, right? And what we learned with the art-based strategy, and one of the things why it is really impactful, is that people have already disassociated. Those folks often who have gotten to those positions, but all of us, we disassociate from that part of ourselves often because it's deemed not valuable by our society at so many points in our life, right? And if we're all of us as adults here, we're so lucky that we haven't erased that entirely because we are told at many points that it is not valuable.
It's not monetarily viable, right? Like it's not something necessarily that you can.
I'm saying it is.
I
to
know,
my clients,
but yes,
because it is. Actually.
I know, but I'm
we're
saying
at that
what we
point now.
get, what we hear is that that's not really gonna.
Right, many points in your life. Did you have a time when someone?
Are you interviewing me?
No, tell me. No, tell me about a time when you felt.
I mean, I feel like when we talk about arts, and not art as applied to work, but art as just art for art's sake, it's okay. How are you going to make money doing that?
What does art for art's sake mean to you?
It means just, well, look at you. What are you art for art's sake. I mean, when I mean that, it's like you're an artist, you're creating work, whatever that looks like, whether that's photography or visual arts, and it's just for the sake of the piece, for the sake of the work, right? And you have a vision for creating something and you create it. Well, then once you create it, I think the follow-up question that I always got is, well, what's that going to be for? And how are you going to make money on that? And who's going to pick that up? And who's going to look at that? And then this is obviously before, a lot of things were on social media and before you could but I do feel like art there needs to be sort of a monetary value on it or some sort of story around it in order for it to have value, right? It can't just be art for art's sake all the time. We talked about art almost as a tax shelter these days, that like if you're talking about the art world in a professional sense, visual art or photography or anything that could be hanging in a museum.
Art market. Yeah,
art market,
That's a good point. We have to be very specific with our language too as we get into this.
Art means anything.
But you said like the art for art's sake is interesting because you were like talking about the thing that you wanted to create.
Sure.
What did you learn? And you told me this experience recently about a couple years ago, making some sculptures that you really wanted to realize.
Did I?
Yeah. And what I want to know is like, what did you learn from the process of making that?
Well, you make these sculptures that you want to create, right? You have a collection that you want to create. The story of where I nailed them all to the walls of places?
It's such a cool story. But really, what did you physically made these, you had this vision, you physically made it. What did you learn from that? What did it teach you?
I mean, I physically made some artwork. I created a collection of work when I was in my 20s when I worked in theater because everyone liked them and it was all made of metal and wood and whatever. And I created them and they were great. And I'd had the collection. I shopped it around to galleries. And this isn't a positive story.
Okay.
I know, it's all right. But just to sort of say, the collection was, some people bought a few pieces. Some pieces went over here. Some pieces went over there. For the most part, I lugged around very heavy metal and fabric pieces for the better part of 10 plus years around various studios, various spaces, until eventually I decided to give them to the streets of New York and hang them up on whatever road I could find and let the city take them. And it was very freeing to do that because, in fact, the weight of those pieces, the weight of the actual physical art was so much to bear that eventually I just wanted it to be somewhere else. And that was because there was no value to them after a while. And I do feel like I know in my own personal life a lot of artists who did create physical work that just sort of have the work in storage and don't know what to do with it. And it's just sort of sitting there and it has no value. So when we talk about art, it's such a vast array of what. So when you say art, make everything arts, which is something that is on your company site. How can everything be art? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. And I will clarify,
and that is it's a buzzy word.
Well, no, I want to clarify. Another limited rebellion is designed to bring arts-based practices into executive education, leadership development. So it's in this context of where can people find room to be creative within their existing constraints and limitations that are these very complicated structures,
let's talk about it.
Very regulated businesses. So now we are fine artists, and my brother and I, you are, and we are such a different, we show up there and we're aliens, which is fantastic. It's so, you really have, I believe, right? You have a lot of value when you show up with a very different perspective. If you can show up with a way where people can actually
buy into.
hear it.
Yeah, well, that's true. So I would love to hear an example, if you can, of when you've gone into a corporate setting and kind of given somebody a task or given a group a task as to what they did, what they actually did and created. Do you have...
I want to go back to your story so badly. That's
Okay, go
that's
back
like
to
the
my
coach
story.
in me, though. Like,
Go
I'm like,
back to my
that's such a rich story. We got to
pull it apart if you want to, but I'm very curious about things that you've given people to do too.
That's the story, though. It's giving people. The idea is to give them, first of all, an opportunity to be a little playful and to remind themselves that they are born to be creative. I always say, I know you're creative, even though someone probably told you along the way that you weren't.
Right.
Do you ever have someone say, like,
to me?
Like, I don't have a creative bone in my body?
Well, I do. One of my closest friends, anytime we talk about drawing and I say, like, let's sketch, and she's like, I can't draw at all. I hate drawing. I'm so self-conscious. And it's like, just draw a stick figure, just draw a line, just draw anything at all, and you're drawing. It doesn't have to look good, or I don't even know what that means to look good. I don't even know when I say looks good, it doesn't need to look like anything.
Because this is the artist. This is what people need to be exposed to about the artist.
Well, that's that's abstraction, right?
Why drawing though? What do you think that's about?
Well, I do think people think that if you're creating something, somebody needs to be able to recognize something within it, right? They need to be able to relate to it in some way, and that if they fail on whatever that looks like, then they get self-conscious and they start to go inside. And I do feel like art could.
Why do they think they failed? Because they didn't recognize, or because somebody in their life
probably said something that said that they couldn't. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
And they may not have said something really harsh. It may have been something really simple, like.
Do you feel like art is triggering though to people? Like the term,
100%.
Right?
So that's what I realized in these contexts that are very regulated, hyper structured. Yeah. There's a lot of risk. Things are at stake here. And making, that's the leadership space, is that making small behavioral changes when you're in a leadership position has a lot of impact. And that's one of the reasons why I love the leadership space, because, and again, leadership is for all of us.
Yes.
That's, as well. But when you see yourself that way, it's truly, you start to realize the tiny changes have ripple effect impact. But the risk feels so great to people to do a small creative thing.
Feel self-conscious, right?
For so many reasons. And that's where I also felt it's kind of meaningful work, because we can't live in a society where it takes bravery, actual bravery, to do something creative. Like, that's unacceptable. We need to feel brave that we can be, that should be something that we're humans, right?
And I do think that the creativity is sort of divvied out, right? That there's,
some people can do it, some people can't.
Some people can do it. Here, creatives.
For some reason, there was some, like, I think Noah and I have been trying to unpack this for a while. We've been talking to a lot of art teachers and things like this. Like, was there something in arts education where they were like, if kids can't copy, like, at this age, if you're not drawing a horse this way, then you are no good? Yeah. Because I really find it's like second grade or third grade, and a lot of people have this, people that are so creative. I hear this story hundreds of times. So then some kids were like, oh, you're good at art, you're not, and it's because whether you could draw like a horse or something in second grade. I couldn't draw a horse in second grade. I don't know. I know I couldn't draw a horse in second grade. And that does, as you said, it means nothing. It's not about anything, and anybody could actually learn to draw if you want to. Drawing on the right side of the brain is a great resource if you're interested. But like you said, it's more about doodling. It's about expressing. It's about lines. It's about just enjoying putting material on paper. They feel very weird. And and again, it's that you really can hurt that little part of somebody. Exactly. And then when they need it, oddly, suddenly they're like, I'm a VP of global operations at XYZ company. And suddenly I'm being told to be like innovative and creative. Well, if you tell people to be innovative, feel comfortable with that at all. What's an exercise that you give a VP at a company? Like, what do you tell them? Well, we have a whole. I know. So one of the things we use, because they're there's a lot of as we're understanding, there's a lot of like kind of preconceived notions people have about creativity, and so a lot of it is kind of breaking those down with non-buzzwords and then demonstrating it. Right. So one thing that people often feel with creativity is like artists, they're so free, they've got so much freedom, they can do anything, right? And we know actually. Right, we know we're the least free. So I don't. That's what we kind of just like, hey, look, like here's what artists can do, isn't that we show up as peers, and I've brought a lot of different kinds of artists. It's not over the years, it's not just been myself and my brother. We've brought in dancers, musicians, performing artists of various sorts like that, poetry, all kinds of artists we brought in to demonstrate a very high level of professional art and show like, hey, we're peer level with you, and we have a very different skill set, and we can help you borrow. Just like if you were going to, let's say I want really good shoulders, I'm going to borrow a swimmer's maybe workout. I'm not going to become an Olympic swimmer, but I might want to borrow that workout because I want some nice shoulders for my, strapless dress, right? So it's kind of this kind of thing, right? So we use the workout language. A lot of people understand that. We talk about you've got to pump up your creative muscle. You have it.
It's
you just
a muscle.
maybe
You
you
just
aren't
have to keep on
exercising
working
it,
it
right?
out. Yeah.
So we got to use metaphors and language that
Yes.
that people can latch into. Okay. They
That
can
feels
start kind of
comfortable.
following
Yeah.
a little bit. Okay. We got to show them some really impressive artists that are very high level, so they can see like, oh, this person is very skilled at what they do. But then they're telling me, I'm going to pull back the curtain. I'm going to really show you the work that goes into this,
Yeah,
and then I'm going to
exactly.
give you some exercises. So we do all kinds of stuff. My parents are both art teachers, so when we were developing a lot of this material, it came out of, first of all, Noah had written some books around his methodology when he did his daily art.
Yeah.
So we had like 365 prompts that he wrote.
Wow.
And it kind of started us on this prompt thing.
Prompts are good.
Prompts are good. And
Yeah.
it's some of the experiences that I had in the art school that I went to, which was really fabulous. And then we would just sit around the kitchen table in my house with my parents' house with my parents, my brother, and a number of our friends who were all also arts educators or various capacities. And we would brainstorm exercises and activities that people had done.
Yeah. And see which ones work.
And like, how do they relate? What kind of conversation will this create? What kind of behavior will this create in somebody? How will this activity kind of unlock some thinking? Becomes not about that like when you're an artist, a lot of times, as you said, you had a vision for a thing you wanted to make.
Yeah, it's not about output necessarily.
This becomes all about process,
Yeah.
and then reflecting on that process. So we're teaching arts. Again, it's arts-based learning.
Right.
Or we could talk about it as arts-based research. So we want to find something out, and we're going to use an arts methodology.
Do you feel like do you feel like ever using the word art is limiting? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why like creativity is all over our.
Yeah, that's why it's more about
Our
creativity.
site.
than-
I know. I
yeah,
wish I
so-
could always use art, but again, anytime you're doing consulting, it's you just bring a lens to the table, right?
Right.
And so our lens is that we're artists and we can
You're
teach you how to
looking
be
through-
creative.
you're looking through that
If you want
creative lens.
creativity,
Yeah.
you have to decide that you feel like you need more creativity.
Yeah.
And we also talk about like, well, what is the value of creativity in your organization or for you right now?
Yeah.
And then we got to make sure we understand, well, let's get clear on what that value is. As you said,
Yes.
it can be all over the place. We can get
Right.
really confused about that.
Yes.
And that's also a point, right? We're not clear on that.
Yeah.
So we say you have to know what the ROI is for yourself
Well,
on
yeah,
this.
what's the ultimate outcome
Yeah.
that you're trying to create, and then how do you get there, right? And it's a little bit of problem solving through creativity as well, right? Potentially.
Yeah, and you start
'Cause
to
you
realize
need
you're
it.
and I think we're talking about this more these days at least in this learning development business world that I'm in. People are trying to talk about it more. It sometimes becomes.
Do you feel like it's coming out more though? I mean, so this goes
don't
right
know.
into your coaching, your one-on-one coaching, because you also do that, as I meant, you coached me. Do you feel like what are you getting from the current landscape? Because I just, from my own perspective, I think we have to start hinging on our creativity because that's the way for us to create our own jobs.
Yeah, and you know what?
Outside of, right?
It's the anxiety and fear are the creativity killers, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, they
So
stifle it.
and
'cause-
therefore, like
yeah.
I think creativity is the killer of like anxiety and they're not killer. I don't use that's not good language, but
Yeah.
right, if you have so much fear or anxiety or shame, which again we're in a moment we are having a lot of feelings,
Yes.
and
are all
like
having-
we need to have those feelings, but we cannot be paralyzed by them, and arts is there for us because it's really great as a tool or a methodology.
Yes.
Because right, it allows us to feel those feelings
And
also
do things within that.
do
You create
something
a
at the same
process
time. Right,
within
you're
that
like-
feeling. Yeah.
You're having the feelings and that's where we also, a very uniquely human thing, we are using our sensory processing capabilities that are completely unique to us being organic organisms and part of the
Yes.
larger organism of living things, right?
Yes. To
So this is our special abilities and
and we should utilize them in order to get through this time period because I think creativity is the only thing that we can do to avoid panic and fear that we might be feeling around work potentially. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
seeing that though. I mean, I'm sure you
Where
are
is it
seeing
not,
Like
right?
where is it
It's everywhere.
everywhere?
I don't know
right?
a
It's
single
just
person who
happening
isn't
right now.
having
yeah.
yeah.
And are you feeling like people are then sort of forging their own path? I mean, what are some trends that you're
I
seeing
think
with people?
don't
No.
I mean, we've been in such a chaos. We've honestly been dealing with this right for years, if we're honest, right? And some
Well,
people,
yeah.
some of us have. A lot of us have proven we can transform and we can do cool stuff. And I love the so many good things that people have done through to demonstrate that we can persevere and that we
Yeah.
can adapt and we can take the good part and we can throw away the bad part. And that is so good. But it's just been really relentless.
Yes.
And right now, it's like wherever you stand on anything, it's so much uncertainty.
Absolutely. Everywhere.
Yeah.
Across the board. Yeah, I know. So, I mean, are you giving solace in sort of digging out where people's creative juices lie in terms of just maybe re-steering the conversation of work and what people could be doing?
It's like, I think, again, I mean, that's where where I also love the modus operandi of coaching as it's a space.
Yeah.
Like for sitting there for a minute and giving yourself a moment to address this.
Yeah.
And find your creativity.
And also agency, right?
Yeah. Because if you have, I think you feel like you don't have agency with all these constraints. And again, I go back to my clients because they're often in very restrictive industries, there's just only so many things they can do, right? So that's not acceptable, though. You have to. There is something you can do. There's always something you can do. Yeah. It's also like, well,
how do you find that thing?
How do you find that thing?
That you can do and have agency over what you're
doing.
And
also accepting that thing, that it's a small thing, probably.
Yeah.
And it's better to do a small thing.
Do one small thing.
Do something.
And do nothing and feel paralyzed.
Feel paralyzed, right. Yeah. So that these sort of unlocking and, again, just using our physical.
Paralyzed and also numb, right? I mean, do we also feel like numbness is, I mean, people are numbing themselves all over the place with a lot of different sorts of sources, right? I get it. I mean,
but I've heard people say things too about being like, oh, I know I should be doing whatever. I'm having trouble with the job, but I'm taking voice lessons and I know I shouldn't be. They're telling me these kinds of things, or I'm doing a dance class, or I'm studying a language. I'm like, that's great. That's actually what you should be doing right now. First of all, like,
getting yourself out of,
do something different, do a thing.
Yeah.
And
something outside of your comfort zone,
something. I think also that's like, we're talking about like uniquely human things, like
things that you enjoy that are outside of the general thing that you're being tasked with doing. Because I do feel like we align ourselves with our work a lot and who we are within our work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it defines who we are as people. Yeah. And then that ends up changing our whole narrative about how we see ourselves.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I love the coaching, and I love the leadership and the bringing this into workplaces, which I wouldn't have thought I love that, but I think we really identify with our work, and work is meaningful to our lives. And it's where we spend a lot of our time. And
and the agency over the work. I mean, that's a bit of the MO for this show too, is just, finding agency over your own work and your life and enjoying what you're doing. Which still feels like a bit of like people feel guilty about enjoying what they're doing.
Right? Yeah. That's very American.
That's a very American experience.
The guilt, the shame, well, there's a few cultures. My husband is Japanese, so I know he also has a lot of,
does that also feel the same?
Guilt and shame
Do
about
Europeans not feel that way? I don't know.
How many hours they take for lunch?
Yeah, they take like the whole afternoon off.
Because they know that we'll do the extra work here.
Yeah, they know that it will come out here. I know. What did somebody say recently? That like America's where you go to work and Europe's where you go to spend money and like retire, basically, is something I heard recently.
I'm sure there's a lot of Europeans that
would not like that point of view,
really
but
hard,
at the same time,
different culture. Different culture.
Yeah, well, we're kind of on a treadmill all the time.
Part of it is also understanding, like, when do I know how what I've done is sufficient?
Right. Well,
am I allowed to be satisfied?
Am I allowed to feel good? Can I have a break? Am I allowed to feel? That's pretty. I mean,
that's part of the trap. That's by design.
It is by design, but from who? From our corporate overlords in general? Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like
structurally we have to like look at it from we have to.
Do you feel like as a coach, I mean, I felt like you gave me permission. You probably give permission to people to be able to feel like they don't have to be accomplishing things all the time or feel like they need to accomplish something necessarily. Like, what is the goal that people are setting? Do you feel like people don't always know where the target is moving? Right.
Yeah. When you're that's one of the things I like to bring to coaching is that sort of structural analysis, right? There's constraints that are just there that you can't escape, and then you define yourself by them, right?
Yeah, they become what you are.
Yeah, but then there's also assumptions you're making, right? Because it just feels like a constraint that affects you personally, but it may not actually
not have anything to do with you necessarily. It might just be for you, and that's just what it is, and you can disrupt that and break that if you want to.
Yeah, but I think it's good. We talked about that. It's a good point to recognize it and to see it, and that's a lot of the coaching is to be able to.
Well, once you see the other side of it, once you're sort of outside of it and you're looking into it.
How do you get outside to look in?
I don't know. How do you get outside to look in? You have to, is there a breaking point that you sometimes feel like exists in people's careers where they do see the outside of it?
Getting perspective. Yeah. I mean, then that's what a lot of this work is to help people do. Like, let's you can't get a different result if you're just doing the same thing over and over again. You're just gonna get the same results or worse, diminishing returns, which is what typically happens.
Yeah,
so you have to find new ways to do things. You have to challenge yourself.
Well, what do you think?
And like not forcing, but doing something that is a little bit scary to you
is good.
Is probably good, but you have to be able to assess like what I'm having a feeling of fear, and when someone's asking me to make a drawing, what is that about? Like, let's actually address. Why am I really scared? Am I really scared?
Well, I think people are.
What's the risk? Like, what are we doing? So we work through that. We use that, as a discussion, and we do drawing exercises sometimes. We did a lot during COVID. We developed a whole online. We called Drawn Together. We did a lot of drawing work with people and help them kind of unlock that capability.
Because people feel very self-conscious about drawing. I mean, it's just, I remember, this is a side note, when I was in school, I was very bad at math. And so I would teach kids how to draw and they would teach me how to do math. That was that was how I managed to hack it, because everyone felt very upset about that they couldn't draw. And I was like, I can draw.
You were like skill traits. So that's the future of work.
Like I can draw, but can you teach me how to, we all have to buddy up to make sure to support each other, right? I mean, I guess
the next level I would say is see, like you're helping each other expand your capabilities and your capacities.
Exactly.
And that's like.
And I do feel like there should be more of that happening where we're supporting each other across the board, right? I mean, do you ever feel like you're building, do you ever matchmake people within your coaching? Do you ever feel like you want to build community within people? Do you do things like that? I'm just curious.
I'm pretty strict about like my coaching style. However, I do sometimes if, we build, of course, when you're coaching with someone, it can be quite, you get really connected as we did, and you become friends, and you want to. And so I will, if it makes sense to like, step out and be like, hey, I'm going to share something with you after if you are interested, and kind of just really make sure it's clear that it's not part of the formal coaching, but that we can make connections. Because of course, that's one of the things I love about coaching is just meeting cool people, and I love being a connector. So 100%.
Connecting people up. Yeah.
Always. It's just another way to get to know more about also with coaching, I'm really getting to understand people's motivations and like not make assumptions about why they want to do something and how they should go about doing it. So I love that as well. It helps me really learn about how other people think about things and how they'll get to their goals, which is different. I'm not giving advice. It's not how I would get to my goals. So
Okay. Well, I'm curious. So we've been talking for like a very long time already. I know it goes really fast, but I know you've been recently working around theater, and I want to make sure we get to this, of course. And do you want to speak a little bit about what your thesis was? Do you want to talk about that?
I could talk a little bit about,
I mean, I just say like the theater of the oppressed? Because I just want to caveat by saying that I went to theater school and I never heard of the theater of the oppressed. They never taught it. That's not something that happened. So do you want to give me a little bit of intel on it?
I love just spreading this language and for people to Google and learn more about, because there is plenty to learn about it. And there's a lot out there. But I had started media studies when I was working in entertainment marketing and in that sort of innovation space. And I was like very concerned about the kind of social media space and self-presentation identity there. That's like, I wrote something, I laughed about it now. I was like, all of the things I was writing have happened and everyone said it so much better. So when I came back to grad school about 12 years later, with the opportunity to work with the same professor, Douglas Rushkoff, who, if you've never read any of his books, he's got like a dozen bestsellers out there. They're all fantastic. There was an opportunity to merge media studies with performance studies. And I was like, yes, because I realized that I'm not an actor. I'm not a performer, an entertainer, but performance has been there for me, and theater has been there for me at times when I felt like I didn't have any agency. And, I was thinking about like a childhood experience with some like youth, like anti-nuclear activism theater that I'd done as a kid. And I was like, oh man, I forgot about that. And like, I had no control over that situation, but it made me feel like I was doing something, and I was in community. Yeah. So kind of reflecting on these experiences, I had done some street theater in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was political and that was cool. And then again, feeling like I have no agency in this situation, and where can this arts-based methodology, where's there opportunity here to use this to bring people together around decision-making and being better at collaborating with diverse groups of people. The project was around using an arts-based methodology, so I call it an embodied practice, to help in public planning decision-making. So part of public planning, anytime you're making a decision there, you have to have a some kind of public, where you're getting information from the public, some kind of public forum, and usually that's like a forum. You may have participated in something like that, or a meeting that's very boring. The aesthetics of this, it sucks. The power dynamics of it sucks. Nobody wants to participate, or it's at a time when you can't be there. So I started thinking, well, like, what's a theater-based way to do this? And I learned in school, again, I was a theater person. We've been very involved in the theater, experimental theater and contemporary theater, all of it. I had not heard of Theater of the Oppressed. It comes out of the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is Paulo Freire. Pardon my Portuguese pronunciation. Maybe someone can say it better. But it's about a learning methodology where it's equals learning from each other. And so in this Theater of the Oppressed methodology that I borrowed, it's called Forum Theater, a group of people will come together and create some scenes based on their lived experience, something that is an unresolved challenge, a struggle, a dynamic of struggle between typically two people, or could be something that's structural dynamics, but usually a very specific personal experience. So we talked about the built environment and the kind of frustrations people were having in the community that we did this project in. And then after you develop these plays, what's different about this is that the plays are designed to be disrupted and transformed by the audience. So the audience no longer is just a spectator; they become spect-actors. So great, right?
Yeah,
so and it's the idea that we are all in our lives, and sometimes we're spectators, we're observing, and that's very valuable. And sometimes we're actors, because an actor is anyone who takes action, right? And at some point in our life, we should be taking action, and not just observing, but and then it's a process, right? That it's an observation, reflection, action process, and it happens in community. So we can actually we just talking to another theater friend about, like, one of the things that's really cool about you learn from theater and from arts is you're not always the person whose work when you're learning you're talking about. Right. Sometimes you're just observing other people's work and it getting critiqued or whatever, and that's extremely valuable, right? Right. So in this process, you run through different. The audience gets to decide, okay, I didn't like how the protagonist handled the situation. I have a different way of doing it, and instead of having a discussion about it, they actually step into that role and they try it out.
And they see how it feels.
Because it's also one thing to say, like, oh, I have a solution. He should do this, right? How many of us have said?
Right. But you can't know until you're in the person's shoes, right? And then you can actually, I think
so that's so wild to see people like.
It's incredibly impactful. I mean, are you, and I know we've been talking for a long time, but with this sort of knowledge that you have now, are you planning on, what's the application for it necessarily? Like, are you going forward, I suppose?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, I'm just still reeling from it, but I developed something called Civic Innovation Theater Experience site, and we demonstrated it in Richmond, Virginia. And we'll see. Maybe I'll make a toolkit or something.
I hope so.
There's so many wonderful other groups that also do use this theater methodology. It's worth Googling. New York has one of the most prolific Theater of the Oppressed groups here as well. So maybe get more involved with them. I don't know.
All right. That's something I want to do. And before we wrap, I want to talk about the creative sprint. So if we're wondering about some of the things that Mica and Noah talk to corporate people about, I'm going to say, I'm going to give, not that we're all not corporate people. We're all kind of corporate people.
Yeah, but people.
People are people.
We're all trying to survive, right?
I know. But if we're wondering about what GE or anyone was actually doing as an exercise, I'm going to give some prompts that, just out at the end of the episode right now.
Yeah, this is from our Creative Sprint Toolkit.
Correct. And for those watching, I'm just going to put it up in front of the camera. Hello.
Yeah, it's
a beautiful box, actually.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a quick start for anybody who wants to start instigating creativity.
Right. This is one that our producer, Eleni, really likes. Make a thank you note to something you use every day. Eleni said her bed. So thank you, bed, for giving me such a good night's sleep. What would I thank? I thank my kettle that I turn on every morning because I have no voice when I wake up in the morning. Some might guess that. Or you could recreate a famous work of art, which I think is sort of interesting, in any material you want. That's my added addendum. Put a window where there was on the wall where there wasn't one before. I think that's pretty cool. That's Coyote right? Like the coyote style.
Yeah, it's great
like
for like a lot of people will do this. Will do it in workplaces, and they'll take a picture of what they did and they'll share it. And a lot of people's offices are pretty drab, so it's pretty nice to put their like imaginary like scene behind
I think
them.
imaginary window would be great. And then
Yeah.
create a monument or event to a person who isn't widely celebrated. I think that should be sort of the prompts that everyone should have for somebody in their life that isn't widely celebrated. I think that's a beautiful one. Micah, we could have continued to talk for like another hour.
I know.
But thank you so much for being on the show.
Yay, thanks for having me. Congrats on launching this. It's awesome.
Aw, thank you. I'm your host, Nickey Frankel, saying if you do what you love, you never work a day. Our show is created by Preview Media. Our producers are Lenny Simos and Stefan Balsic. Technical support and editing by Tori Yako and Jasmine Jackson. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and those around you.